Joining us right now for the final time this football season in his weekly spot to give us the latest on the New York Jets is the longest tenured New York Jets beat reporter. He covers the team for ESPN and ESPNNewYork.com. It's our guy, Rich Cimini, who joins us here on NY Game Day. Rich, it's Jake and Mike with you. Happy Super Bowl Sunday. Appreciate you joining us.
Happy Super Bowl Sunday, guys. Good to be with you this last time as we celebrate this football holiday and get ready to get this game going.
Just real quick, did you feel as old as I did when Seth Ryan was announced as the passing game coordinator?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Of course, you've known Seth probably longer than any of us, but I remember him bouncing around training camp, when he was a kid and Rex was the coach. And I think I remember one time Rex came into the press room and was goofing off and showed some of Seth at Clemson, as a holder on the place kicks and the PATs. And so, it's cool for the family. I mean, often you get 3 generations of a family coaching for one franchise. So it's a cool story.
So he's the passing game coordinator for the new OC, Frank Reich. First time we've had you on, Rich, since the Jets hired Reich as their offensive coordinator. What were your thoughts on that hire?
Yeah, I like the hire. I understand what Aaron Glenn is trying to do now. I think certainly we talked about the breaking down of this coaching staff, the overhaul, and now it's the building back up part. And I see what he's doing. Clearly Aaron Glenn is going to have a much greater involvement on the defensive side of the ball, probably calling plays and taking control of that side. He needed to go out and get someone who could be his head coach of the offense, to just be someone that he didn't have to worry about, he could totally trust, give total autonomy to. And I think that guy is Frank Reich. He's doing it on every level as a player, assistant coach, coordinator, head coach. And so if you can't trust Frank Reich to run that, who can you trust? And yeah, it's a little bit of a concern that he's been out of the league for a couple of years. I think he'll catch up quickly. I think he's was a really good offensive coach. He knows how to handle quarterback instability, which should help him with the Jets. He went through a quarterback per year with the Colts, and they still had a pretty good run there. So I think it was a good hire.
And how do you think where they are now, like with the process? Are they done, close to done? Like from a Jet fan perspective, like what should they expect, if anything?
Yeah, well, the major pieces are in place. Brian Duker as the defensive coordinator, and of course Frank Reich as the OC. Seth Ryan as the passing game coordinator, and they still, they did hire Alfredo Roberts as their tight ends coach. He's been around the league a long time, former player, most recently on Mike Tomlin's staff. So that's 2 coaches, Mike Tomlin's staff, Alfredo Roberts and Carl Dunbar. Another familiar name, Mike, I know from back in the day with the Jets. So he's a good defensive line coach, so I think that's an upgrade for the Jets. And so they still need to hire a quarterbacks coach, I think, and a couple of other spots as well. But I think quarterbacks coach is the one that's going to get the most attention simply because of the nature of that position, and the Jets are always making quarterback news. So it'll be interesting to see where they go in that spot.
Rich Cimini is our guest, ESPN Jets reporter, host of the Flight Deck podcast as well. Rich had a great interview with Boomer Esiason on Flight Deck this week, talking about Boomer's buddy Frank Reich, of course, being named the Jets OC, so I highly recommend you listen to that if you haven't done so already. Rich, as far as the quarterback in general, right, you mentioned they need a QB coach. Does hiring Frank Reich, in your opinion, point to a certain direction the Jets could be leaning in regards to their plan for the quarterback spot?
Well, certainly Frank Reich is going to have a lot of input into that decision. I think the Jets are going to lean on him heavily for that, and all their offensive decisions, as a matter of fact. But, if you look through Frank Reich's career, he's always been more of a traditionalist when it comes to, like, quarterback prototype, the taller, bigger, more drop-back type quarterback. You look through the year. He got Andrew Luck. He had a Carson Wentz in Philly, and then Andrew Luck, and then Jacoby Brissett, all guys 6'3", 6'4", and more. And so, maybe that's a prototype of what they might be looking for. I would certainly keep an eye on Jacoby Brissett. That situation in Arizona is very up in the air in terms of what they're going to do. Brissett is under contract for another year, but a potential trade target for the Jets to come in there. Kirk Cousins is probably going to get released by Atlanta in about a month from now. I think that would be another player to keep an eye on. And so those would fit, what Reich is looking for. But I also think they'll draft a quarterback. It may not necessarily be in the first or second round, but I think they'll bring someone in here that he can start grooming and get them set, long-term and short-term through the 2026 season.
Yeah. Rich, before I ask my question, like Brissett to me would make sense. I just don't see Arizona letting him go. I think he's a good player, and they're rebuilding too. They got the third pick in the draft. So I think that would be ideal from a Jet perspective, but I'd be surprised if Arizona did anything. But given, Frank Reich's background from a draft standpoint, is there a certain type of quarterback, like Jet fans, are there any like early sort of like connections you think can make sense for them in the draft?
Just going back to the Arizona thing, obviously, Mike LaFleur, ex-Jet coordinator, is going to have a lot of say in that decision. It sounds like they're going to probably move on from Kyler Murray. So maybe you're right, Mike. Maybe you don't want to trade both of your veteran quarterbacks in one offseason. That would be a lot of upheaval in one spot. So, again, a situation to keep an eye on. But in terms of the draft, Frank Reich, he did coach college last year. He was 4-8 at Stanford. So, maybe he came across some of these quarterbacks. We're going to find out a lot more at the Combine in a couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to getting to Indy to find out a little bit more about these prospects. Ty Simpson is going to be the name that generates a lot of buzz. Now, would the Jets consider him with the 16th pick? I'm not sure about that. Would they take him at 33? That's a possibility there. He's a little smaller. I mean, he's only about 6'1", I believe, or 6'2". I don't think he'd fit the traditional Frank Reich quarterback. But again, we'll have to see how the process plays out. It looks like Trinidad Chambliss will be in the draft. His waiver was declined by the NCAA. I think that's still an ongoing legal battle, but chances are he'll be in the draft. To me, he's very intriguing. Now, he would be the opposite of what you would say a Frank Reich quarterback would be, but he is a very, very talented player. On the smaller side, obviously. But to answer your question, Mike, I'm not sure exactly where Frank Reich, what he thinks of these quarterbacks in the draft, and so that's something we're going to have to find out as we go along.
Rich Cimini is our guest, talking all things Jets here on New York Game Day. If the Jets are interested in acquiring a veteran who's under contract, of course, with a different team, how aggressive do you think the Jets will be? Would they be willing to trade one of their first for the right guy? They have the 2 second-round picks. We batted around some names earlier, Rich, like Mac Jones. If the Niners wanted, let's say, a second-round pick, would they be willing to trade that? Just how aggressive do you expect the Jets to be to try and get someone at that spot?
They have to be very aggressive. I mean, they don't have one right now. I mean, they're in the worst place you can be as an NFL franchise. When you're going into February, you're sitting here on Super Bowl Sunday and you don't know who your quarterback's going to be. That's got to be a very uneasy feeling. Mike would know that better than me. Being in that chair and not knowing who your quarterback's going to be when you line up on the first day of training camp, that's not a great place to be. And so, yes, I do think Darren Muji will be ultra aggressive in making calls. Will he call the Raiders to try to trade up to number one and get Mendoza? Sure, why not? You got to make that call. I mean, just to see if it's possible. You have to do everything humanly possible to try to get a quarterback. So if it means parting with one of their premium draft assets, I think they will certainly consider that. Would they give up a 2 for Mac Jones? I mean, that's a lot to give up for Mac Jones. When you do something like that, you can. It's more than a one year situation. You're thinking him as someone who could come in for multiple years at that position. So that's what makes this so intriguing, because there are so many tentacles to this story. It could go in so many different directions, but I think they will leave no stone unturned as they try to figure out this problem.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. I think I think we all see it the same way. It'll be a combo platter. Beyond the quarterback, though, Rich, like if you had to take a guess, if the Jets were going to go out, all these draft choices, all this cap room, and we're sitting here a month from today, and the three of us are talking, what's the one thing that the three of us may go, wow, that's a big deal?
Well, defense, I think is going to, in the draft, I think it's going to be a defensive draft. The defense was awful last year. I think we all know that. We saw it with our own eyes. We don't even have to mention statistics. We just saw it. And they need to bring in probably 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 starters on defense to come in there and just change the mindset on this defense. change maybe the schematically, bring in, they need a defensive tackle. They need another linebacker. I don't think Quincy Williams will be back. They need safeties. They don't have any safeties that I would consider. Maybe Malachi Moore is a potential starter for next year. So they need another edge player. Arvell Reese is my guess right now, the leading candidate to be the pick at number 2. So you bring in an edge player like that. I just think they need so much work on defense. And, offensively, the offensive line is pretty much intact. You got to find the quarterback, of course. To me, the next really interesting question as we get closer to free agency is what are they going to do with Breece Hall? I think tagging is on the table. I could see them using one of the tags, either transition or franchise on Breece Hall to try to keep him, because I think if he gets to market, then I think he'll be gone.
Rich Cimini's our guest, staying with some of the internal free agents for the Jets. How do you see the offensive guard situation playing out, Rich? Both AVT and John Simpson are free agents.
Yeah, I would say that there's a better chance of AVT coming back than John Simpson. I mean, AVT's in a really interesting situation. He's a good player. I think we all know that. He's just had some really bad luck with injuries coming. He's missed basically like a couple of years worth of injuries coming off the injury last year from preseason, the pec tear. So, or was it triceps? One or the other, but he's coming off that. And, I think they'll offer him a contract. It might be more of a prove-it type situation. But I have a feeling if he got out to the market, I think someone would be willing to roll the dice on a young, talented, versatile offensive lineman and give him a multi-year deal. So I'm not so sure a prove-it one-year deal is going to get it done for AVT. If I were the Jets, I would take that chance. I think he's a guy you would be willing to bet on. I do not believe John Simpson will be back with the Jets.
Yeah, one thing on that though, Rich, I agree with your assessment of AVT, but that other team has to sit there and say hey, we don't know the player, and a team with a lot of cap space is letting him walk out the door. The risk of injury is going to be there for all teams. So that to me is a little bit of a trickier, discussion. So we'll see how it plays out, but that's just something else that if I'm his agent, that has to be a factor in their decision making as well.
Yeah, that's really what's so intriguing about that. I'm trying to think of a comp, a player like that. What is AVT? He's only like 25 or 26 years old. I mean, he's a good player. He can play any position, any guard, any tackle spot on the line, which is so valuable in today's NFL. I think he'd rather stay at guard. I think Joe Tippmann would rather stay at guard. Speaking of guards, I think he, of course, can play center as well, but I think Tippmann is looking for an extension. I think that's something the Jets will look into as well. I don't think it'll be something they do before the draft. I think that would be more of a training camp type thing, later in the summer type thing. But Joe Tippmann is eligible. I certainly think he's worthy of an extension. He's versatile. He's durable. He never misses any games. He's a good player. So that's another thing to keep in mind as the Jets try to rebuild this offensive line.
Last one for me, Rich, and I want to localize the Super Bowl with these two teams. Of course, New England and Seattle coming up later today. What lessons can the Jets learn from both these teams in the Super Bowl?
Well, defense matters. I think, we get sometimes carried away in the NFL. It's an offensive league. It's a quarterback-driven league. But, and I think defense matters. So if you're a Jet fan and you're looking for some sort of shred of silver lining, you have a defensive-minded coach. And, oh, by the way, the two coaches in this game are defensive-minded. I think it's the first time in about 9 years since both Super Bowl coaches were defensive-minded. So there's a shred of hope if you're a Jet fan. Defense matters, and I think Aaron Glenn, as I just said a minute ago, will try to rebuild this defense. And, the quarterback situation, I think the lesson to be learned there is, I'm sure you guys have been talking about the Darnold situation. When you got a young quarterback with potential, you want to hold on to him. Back in 2020, I was in favor of keeping Darnold. They ended up trading him. I'm not a fan of trading young quarterbacks with potential, and they did. And so, but I think it shows you can get a quarterback in a number of different ways. Darnold's bounced around the league. This is his fifth team. So you can get a recycled quarterback and go to the Super Bowl. Or if you're lucky enough, you can get a Drake May. You could get a high draft pick and get that guy and build around him, and certainly the Patriots have done that. Now, of course, it's the Jets' luck that they're picking second in a one-quarterback draft, so that's just typical Jet luck, right? But I think defense is what you can take out of the Super Bowl if you're a Jet fan.
And who wins today, Rich, and why?
Yeah, I like Seattle in this one. I guess most people are picking Seattle. I think they're just better on defense and special teams in particular. And I really think it comes down to Sam Darnold. And is he going to be regular season Sam, where he had 14 interceptions and had the highest turnover rate facing pressure? Or is he going to be playoff Sam, where he's been basically almost flawless, no interceptions in the postseason, has just been on a real heater these last few weeks? Is he going to be that guy? I think he'll be that guy. I think he's just reached a new level of confidence and will play that way against the Patriots. I think Seattle's just more explosive on both sides of the ball. Now, the Patriots are really well coached. They're very good situationally, red zone, third down. They're very smart. They don't make mistakes. But the one thing that concerns me there is the offensive line. Will Campbell's had a few hiccups in the postseason, and Drake May's been sacked 15 times, which is the most by any quarterback going into a Super Bowl in the postseason. So looking for, I don't care who wins. I'm just hoping for a good game, but I do think Seattle will win.
Well, Rich, we've appreciated you coming on with us every single week throughout the football season. Always look forward to these segments. So thanks so much for coming on all year, and enjoy the game today.
All right, guys, it's been a pleasure every week, and we'll catch you down the road.
Rich, we're going to call you next Sunday just to check in.
You can call me anytime, Mike. You know that.
Rich
yeah,
Cimini.
You may not pick up, but I can call.
The great Rich Cimini with us there. It is a weekly spot for the final time. Of course, check out all of Rich's work on ESPN, ESPN.com, and listen to his Jets podcast, Flight Deck, available where you get your podcast.